Hey, what's up guys, Chris here and welcome to another Creatrix Visuals tutorial. Have you guys missed me saying that? No? Just me? Cool. Anyways guys, welcome back to another episode, and today it's not a React episode that comes after this one. It's still a pretty sick one because we're gonna take a look at some tips and tricks as well as a visual effects tutorial about how to edit something when it comes to you going out there, shooting a bunch of awesome things and then having a bunch of files. How do you start? Where do you take it? And what happens? And basically that will be my take on it, and hopefully you guys are gonna learn something and you're gonna go out there and create some very cool stuff. Today we're featuring the none other than legendary R34 Skyline. When I was a kid and I would play Gran Turismo 2 back in the PlayStation 1 days, this car was so legendary, as well of course being Paul Walker's car. Rest in peace. From the original Fast and Furious clips. So I was very pumped to shoot a very short promo for this car and of course make a few changes to YouTubeify it for the channel. So anyways guys, with that said, I hope you enjoy. Let's take a look at the clip. That was sick, or at least I hope you guys think so as well. Now, again, there are a lot of things going into this and creating something like this, but I'm going to take you step by step through the edit process, as well as take a VFX tutorial when it comes to After Effects about that sick exhaust pop. Now, before we get started guys, if you are a content creator, a filmmaker, a videographer, or you're starting your way to get there, you should pay attention because today's episode is brought to you guys by Artlist. Licensing music can be one of the biggest limitations when it comes to either a creative project or a commercial project, and it can really hinder the entire process because back in the day you have to pay a very big hefty fee to get a single song to license for your project. But with Artlist, it's as simple as hitting up the power button in your camera and hitting that red record button. The sick part of using a platform like Artlist is that with a single annual subscription, we can get direct unlimited access to the entire library, so we can browse through and explore to find that great song that will tell the story that we're trying to tell. If you're interested guys, make sure to check them out by the link down in the description, so you can also get 2 months extra for free. With that said, let me take you back to the beginning and the whole entire thought process of how you can pull something like this off. Let's say you went out there, you had your camera, you had your lenses, you had your gimbal, your drone, you spent a good few hours prepping as well as shooting, and now you're home, you put your card in the computer and you have your files. And you're like, okay, where do we start? Once you have all your files, when it comes to independent filmmaking, I think this is by far the best way to approach something like this, which is finding the soundtrack first and then placing your edit based on that soundtrack. Now you might be wondering, why would I do that? And the reason is because in big movie productions, TV, whatever it is, first they will shoot something, the director with the editing team are going to create the edit, and once the edit is locked, it will be passed to the sound composer and they will make the music and of course the themes, but they will adjust it based on the edit. So all the hits, all the pivotal moments have the perfect companionship of the soundtrack as well. Now, in our case, when you're an independent creator or filmmaker, or you have a small team and you go out there, you work with great people and you have something to work on the editing side, you need to have your soundtrack locked before you start editing, because then you can ensure that you can do the exact same thing. You can segment your edit and the sequence of how things happening based on the soundtrack that you found. Here is where things get tricky. Finding the proper soundtrack. Now, in this example, we're working with a very legendary car, and of course, if you guys are keen to the car community, you will know that the Nissan Skyline, it has the great and sick nickname Godzilla. Being a Japanese car and just devouring so many cars at its time, it very fairly got that nickname. Now, I wanted a very tense, dramatic, and cinematic song to basically reflect that aspect of the car, as well as it being kind of like a more of a trailer, kind of like teasing sequence. That's what I wanted. So what I did is I went to Artlist and I started with the platform, which, by the way, their platform has the best design by far. Now the cool thing is that I can segment my search based on mood, video type, instrument, and genre, which means that I don't have to go through 500 songs in a list, and I can distinguish and tell Artlist this is the ballpark of what I'm looking for, and then the system is gonna do a great job of giving me songs that are closely associated to what I'm looking for. So what I did is I went to Artlist, I put on my search marks, and I started looking and going through the songs and just closing my eyes, because I already have my clips and footage that I recorded already set in mind in my folders. I just close my eyes and go through the songs, and then I will hit that one song, and as it plays I can start stitching up my sequence and my edit and just see it. Now of course that takes a bit of experience, but you will get there. But I think we all can associate that with that when we hear a song and we just close our eyes, that song makes us think of certain images, because songs are so powerful and they're just an amazing tool to help us tell the story, the message, or just a freaking sick sequence. After I download the music and I'm ready and I know that I'm set to go and save for that, I don't have to worry, I just can't focus on the creative aspect of this. I will fire it up to my editor, and then based on the music, I will start stitching up the edit. So now what I do is I will go through my shots and say, how do I want to open this? Through the Filmmaker React episodes, guys, and the analysis that we go through them, many of you guys know that I'm a big fan of the opening scenes and how you will have the first ever opening shot when it comes to your project. And of course, I chose one of my favorites, which is the bird's eye view drone shot. After that, based on the beat of the song, I will change the scenes. Because again, if you guys are fond of the Filmmaker React, we had so many lessons about how you should cut, and in this case, we're working with more of a cinematic trailer type of edit. So basically, on the beat of the song, I will switch the angles and the shots. And basically, since I started through a cool bird's eye view, I haven't really shown the car from like a normal perspective. So then I want to tease a bit the back, a bit the front, and then go into more details until the song rises up, and then I need to make my edit rise up as well in terms of the shots. So we have another very cool pivotal kind of like almost game-like camera drone shot, and then it cuts to the character looking at the car. And once that happens, then we have the awesome sick ignition of the car that has the exhaust pop as well. And then we have the very cool Fast and the Furious like edit that it just goes very bump. Our edit is basically done other than the last cool tease scene at the end, and that's it. After that is done, when you log your edit, you start working on image processing, making sure that things look amazing, crisp, and they just have that film like look to them that is just like that extra twist, you know? So after your color grading, and all the things are done, or before you can start if you have visual effect shots. In this case we did have a visual effect shot to pull through. So now let me take you guys by how something like this can be pulled off using After Effects. Of course, the project file, guys, is updated in the Creatrix Vault. If you remember, you can just download the project and follow the tutorial along and have all the assets needed to pull the same thing off. So that's it. Let's fire up After Effects and let's get started creating this very cool flame type exhaust pop effect. Okay guys, so here we are within After Effects and I have the Creatrix Vault ready to go with everything we need to get started. So I'm gonna isolate my original clip over here. Of course, it's been pre-graded and adjusted in terms of the movement that I wanted because I did change the aspect ratio to a more cinematic one. So the first thing that we need to do is decide at what point our ignition flame is gonna come in. So maybe based on sound design or based on the beat of the song, as we discussed, you will decide where that point is and you will go to that frame, and now we need to track our clip. So basically, the first step is to track our clip, and the second step is to compose in all of our VFX assets as well as effect layers and make the desired look. Now, the way that this is done, basically, if I open up everything, if I zoom in and we can go a bit frame by frame. So we have the car, we have the ignition flame, which is basically composed of two parts. One, the spark asset, as well as the flame asset. As we go through, we have a bit of a light effect going on, just a quick flash to basically emphasize the ignition of the exhaust. Then we have the particles going out, and as you can see, if you take a note right over here, we have a light bleed from those assets as well as the car itself. If I isolate before and after, you can see the difference. And if you focus on the ground, this was something that came up later when I was editing. I really wanted the exhaust pop to scorch the ground itself. So if we go through here, guys, you can see that the exhaust actually affects the ground itself as well as the light, and we have a cool distortion going on. So basically, this is kind of like my take on this effect, which is basically scorching the ground, have some particle as well as a flame going on, the light bleed effect as well as some heat distortion. So now that we've discussed basically what the effect is composed of, we can start with the first step, which is essentially tracking our clip. There are many ways to track, guys. I'm a bit old school when it comes to kind of like simple rotational kind of movements like this one. I like to use the built-in 2D track and not go into creating cameras and then making planes and things like that. So in this case, I'll just right click, go to track and stabilize and select track motion. Once this is selected, I will go here to my track adjustment settings and I will hit rotation as well. What that is going to do is going to pick up two tracking points for us to track. Now, make sure, guys, that in your main composition, you have the res set to full because that will update the tracking res as well. So now it's our job is to basically select two tracking points, one for position, one for rotation, and tell After Effects to track those 2 points in space. And basically, once that's done, and hopefully After Effects does a pretty good job, we can then create a null object and parent that data to that null. So basically what I did, guys, I selected that little dot on the ground as well as this one over here. Now, as I'm sure you guys know, the larger kind of like window here tells After Effects where to track this point, the inner point in space as frames go by. And basically, once you selected this, you can select Analyze Forward, and After Effects is going to go through and try to make its best to track basically. The best and more like contrasty points you can select, the better that is, and that's how it goes. Then we can move on to our comp and hit Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and Y to create a new null solid layer essentially, and then edit target, edit that null over here, in my case null tracker, but the null 4 is the new one. Select this one, press OK, and then apply that data. Once you've done that, once you did this, basically if you hit P, you can see all of the tracking data of that null. And now we're ready to start importing our VFX assets, parent them to that null so they're tracked in the scene, and start compositing in our clips with the live footage. So I've already tracked this scene, so it's this null over here. And as you see, if I press P, it has all the data because I tracked the entire scene. You can choose to track from the point onwards where you think your assets are gonna go, but it's usually, if it's not too much, like track the whole thing. It's gonna make it a bit easier. So now we have our tracking null and we have our clip. So now I first brought in the scorched mark. So if I open this up and I go through, you can see it just appearing very gradually as the supposed exhaust pop happens. Now the way you do this, guys, is very easy. If I go to my assets and I select the scorch mark and I bring it in, it's just a very giant scorch mark, as you can see. And what you do with these things is basically compositing them in. So you can change the scale here, let's say 25, and try to start placing it in. Let's say in terms of the perspective of the ground, it fits there. If I zoom in, you will see that the asset is starts overlaying the car itself. So what you can do is simply select your pen tool once you know the position of the asset is set, and then simply make a rough mask around the points that you want to subtract. And once you do this, then the layer, the scorch mark, is not going to overlay with the car anymore. And then hit F on your keyboard to play with the feather value, put like something like 25 to just like ease it in a bit, and that would be it. Now you will parent that you have your frame. Basically, you select your nice frame when you want to start compositing all the assets. You will select this one, the parent tool, and then you're going to parent it to the null tracker. The reason why you do this is because you're letting After Effects know that you want this layer to follow the tracking points of the null. That way, as we move through, you can see that this scorch mark perfectly sits within our scene, and just like that, guys, we have a nice scorch mark affecting the ground after the exhaust pop happens. Now the other cool thing you can do, guys, is hit T to bring up the opacity, and based on when the flames happen, is that asset in. Do not just drop it in full opacity, basically a few frames, 0 to 100% using keyframes. And the way you do keyframes, in case you don't know, guys, you select the frame, you press, let's say 100, and then you select the keyframe tool, and then you go to a later point and you change that value, and After Effects is going to make a keyframe to animate your values, basically. So now we have our scorch mark. It looks kind of like not the best because nothing else is happening. So now we want to start using some light cast. Basically, since we're going to have flames happening, those flames should, one, affect the ground as well as the back of the car, since this is the direction that the flames from the exhaust are happening, as well as a very quick flashy environmental flare, just because it just helps with the impact of the visual effect. So the way you do this, guys, if I open up my layers over here, is you go to and select Ctrl-Alt-Y to create a new adjustment layer, or you can go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. Now with your new adjustment layer, you're gonna make another mask, just like we did with the scorch mark, but in this case we want to have two masks, one for the ground and one for the car. After you have your masks, you press F on the keyboard to feather those masks out. Now, because we're dealing with light, the more the feather is, a bit softer its light fall off is gonna be in the scene. So if I change those back to 0 over here, you see how harsh those edges are? But if we go back, it has a very nice gradual fade outwards, just what light does. Now, of course, if we want to be picky, this is not realistic, because that's not how light would realistically happen if there was a real flame there, but it happens so quickly, and with everything else going on, the audience doesn't mind. They just are very invested in the visuals and the sound and what's happening, so we can get away with some things. Now, I've duplicated my light adjustment layer twice just to increase it a bit. As you guys can see, the first one is not enough in my point, so with the second one we just have a nice burst of light, and of course using T on the keyboard to bring out the opacity, I've animated the opacity of those layers as well to go out, to come in more violently and then come out a bit softer, because that flame is going to last for a few frames. Now that you have your light impact and your ground impact, it's time to talk about our actual pyro assets. So if I fire those things up, once more guys, you go to that frame when you want the effect to take place, and if you go frame by frame, that asset is going to play out, and of course using the same techniques, basically adjusting the scale, the position, as well as the placement, and then linking it to our null track, now that asset is going to work and fit in our scene. So if I go through guys, you can see what's happening. Now, the cool thing about pyro assets is that you have to do a bit of work to compose them in, since they are a very kind of like heat oriented element. So it's very cool to use glow effects as well as colorization to pump up the visual impact of them. As you guys can see, when it's raw, it's just a plain kind of like spark asset. But if you go to effects, stylize, and hit glow, then you can start playing with glow effects. Now, the glow has a few values that you guys play around with. It really depends on how close to the asset the camera is, or like the resolution that you're working with. So play around and basically control the radius, how spread out the glow becomes, and the threshold, and you will get there. A bit of duplication here or there also doesn't help, just get the right amount of glow. And lastly, we will need to colorize the asset to make it a bit more toned up, let's say. I use Video Copilot's excellent color vibrance plugin, which is free, so highly suggested. It's very easy, very fast, and it just does the job brilliantly. Now, basically, now you can start see what we do. With the scorch asset on the ground, the light effect impact with the layer adjustments, as well as our spark asset, now we can see how we're starting to get there. The second one was the flame burst, and it's just that extra flame to just make things a bit more epic, and it's the exact same thing. A bit of colorization, playing around with the levels as well as glow, just to get the heat and the light of the asset to be on the right spot. Now, once that's done guys, we're almost there. I'm gonna drop it in a bit, and I'm gonna play through for you just to see it a bit. We're almost getting there, but the impact of the whole kind of like mini exhaust explosion is not quite there. If I play it through, it's missing something, and that is a very quick flashbang when it comes to light affecting the whole scene. So if I open up my flash adjustment layer, again, it's just a simple adjustment layer set to add, and basically I just bring it in very quickly for like a frame that where basically the spark happens, and that's it. But that little effect, that simple one single frame adjustment layer effect, is all that it takes. By the way, I was mistaken, this is an actual solid, if I'm not mistaken. So if you hit Ctrl Y on your keyboard, you can create a new solid, make it white, and basically then I put it to 50%, so it does not affect the whole thing as if it would be 100%, and then I just set it for a single frame. So with that, now on our scene, the impact becomes way more aggressive, way more epic, and it just makes things work. Lastly, the final thing that I did, that it is indeed optional, is to include some heat waves coming from the exhaust and that flame affecting the car itself. I'm a huge fan of kind of like heat distortion maps when it comes to visual effects, because they really blend in the whole image when it comes to the VFX assets as well as the live action clip. Now, I used Video Copilot's, again, excellent heat distortion plugin, but this one is not free. You can use After Effects built-in turbulent displacement, but in my opinion, it's not as good. And since I have the heat distortion plugin, I want to show you exactly what I use to pull these things off. So once more, I create a new adjustment layer. I create a mask to affect the areas of the image that I want, and then I drop in Video Copilot and hit distortion. Now again, in this case guys, I put the wind speed up to 4 because it's a very quick burst of flames, so I want the air to travel very quickly. And then I played with the noise pattern set to fire, and then I keyframe the amount starting from quite high when it happens, see here on 3, and then dying out as we progress through the scene. This is my settings guys here. Again, this is it really depends on your scene, how close you are to the action and your resolution. So do play around to see what fits, because visual effects is not one thing fits all. You really have to play around, and this is another reason why I created the Creatrix Vault, is to show you guys and share with you real actual production projects that you can then play around with and experiment yourself in case you do not have your own clips or you do not have the assets needed, etc. So do check the Creatrix Vault out. Okay guys, so that would be the wrap of the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. And that would be the end of the video basically guys. I hope I gave you a very cool kind of like explanation of like commentary about how something like this can be pulled up when it comes to the editing and post-production side of things, as well as the very cool tutorial. And I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something. Let me know if you would like more of this kind of videos as well. They're not going to be as frequent as the Filmmaker Reacts, because it takes a lot of work and effort to actually make projects, create them, and then make videos about them. But they are still gonna be a big part of the channel. So that's it guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as check out the links in the description. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Until then, stay creative and awesome.